Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Rockies Daily. I'm your host, Scott Ayers, where, of course, we're talking all things Colorado Rockies. Should be a fun show in store. And let's talk about first the guy that was the obvious silver lining, really the bright star of 2025, and that was Hunter Goodman, who hit 278 with a 520 slugging and had 31 home runs, 95 RBIs, a silver slugger to his name, got an all-star appearance. And now I think the question that needs to be asked is, what is the ceiling for Hunter Goodman, who set a franchise records in hits, home runs, RPIs, and WAR by primary Rockies catcher? This is a guy who had a phenomenal 2025 season and a year where there was just a lot of pain and frustration and disappointment. Goodman excelled. And I think what's exciting is there are still areas where he can improve. He can improve his strikeout percentage. He can improve how many walks he's drawing, right? And also, this is a guy that really was not a primary catcher at the professional league level and slowly and steadily improved his defense as well. He finished slightly above average for blocks, but he can still improve his pop rate. He can still improve defensively, which I think would only add to the kind of player that he is. And I think that's what's exciting about someone like Goodman is this is a player that I don't think anyone had on their radar would have the jump that he's had as a hitter. And now it's, can he replicate this? Because if he can have a season similar to what he had last year, as well as continue to improve defensively, that becomes a very, very valuable piece for the Rockies. It is hard to find a solid catcher in the MLB. You can have guys that are okay, you can have the platoons, everything like that. But to have someone that can be above average defensively and extremely talented at the plate is a big, big deal for Colorado. And it, I think, would really help excel Dave Podesta and Josh Burns' plan on this rebuild. If you can have someone like Goodman that is not a one-hit wonder, but instead a legitimate star, I think that really can change everything, because that is what you need in rebuilds, is you need stars and you need players that can be extremely productive. And we know baseball can be an up and down sport. We know that there can be, seasons that you have one off or struggles or whatever, but ultimately you need consistency, and you need consistency from your star players. And so for Hunter Goodman in 25, it's this breakout season that obviously is awesome. And I think for Rockies fans was really something we could hang our hat on. But now in 2026, I hate to say, but we kind of want to see it again. Just because even just recent memory, and we'll talk about this trade actually a little bit later, is Nolan Jones, who had a really good rookie campaign and then just really fell off. Obviously, two different players, two different types of players. But I think when you just look at guys who have one good year and then they just completely fall off, that's probably the big fear with Goodman is, hey, can you just, even if he hits like 260 and 28 home runs or whatever, if he can just keep that slugging up, right, and if he can continue to show that power, that will just be the big thing for Goodman. But ultimately, I think everyone should be really excited for what he can do in 2026. With now just another offseason under his belt. He obviously probably has all the confidence in the world. And truthfully, there's a real opportunity for him to be that centerpiece of this Rockies franchise. Right now, I wouldn't say anyone is, just because we are in the midst of this rebuild and we just want to see what we have, right? That's what the front office wants is, hey, who's going to step up and who's going to be a centerpiece for this team? You think Hunter Goodman, you think Tovar. Those are probably the two main guys that come to mind. Everyone else will still have to prove it, and those two guys still have to prove it. But I would say if it was a race, those two are a little bit further ahead in the race over everyone else. But for Hunter Goodman in 2026, I think there's a real possibility he can be an all-star again. Not even a real possibility. That should almost be an expectation, as crazy as that sounds. It's just a matter of, can the Rockies develop talent for other guys to join him at an All-Star game? That needs to be what the expectation is. And maybe not in 2026, but down the road. So for Goodman, for being a young, talented catcher, he has just extremely high potential, and very much look forward to what his 2026 campaign can look like. And obviously, one of the most important things is just stay healthy. That was an issue for the Rockies last year. It's just different guys being hurt, different solid players being injured. Hunter Goodman, just stay healthy, and I think that will lead to a really successful 2026. One of the things that we've talked about on this show is obviously the infield, the first base position. And we've mentioned it even a couple times this week. We've mentioned Blaine Crim's name. And I think there is some really obvious paths of where the Rockies will go for first base. We've mentioned Tyler Freeman on this show as a potential guy who could play first base. You take from the outfield, you put him in the infield. That is a possibility. You could roll with kind of the one guy on the roster right now, Blaine Crim, who the Rockies got last year. As well as, of course, there's now Troy Johnston, who was signed in November to a minor league contract. He could be someone that you could see platooned with Crim, Freeman. Those are different options, as well as maybe you go through free agency, which, again, we've mentioned so many different names. One interesting name that could at least, pass the torch, that could platoon, that could really just hopefully hold down the fort until Condon is ready, and that's Paul Goldschmidt, who obviously is not the same Paul Goldschmidt that we all know, but could be serviceable for a season. And because I think that's, in the time that we've talked on the show, that's the one thing, is can you just be serviceable for a season or two? Because the fourth option is Charlie Condon becomes a 2026 opening day starter. Now for Condon, he, I think, still needs a little bit of time to develop, to kind of cook before he is brought up to the major league level. And I think having a sizable competition at first base will only help with some of that development. Is just hopefully bringing out the best in someone like him, which is why I think getting maybe a free agent isn't a terrible idea. I can see the appeal of rocking with Blaine Crim, though, and Troy Johnston, and letting those guys platoon, Johnston being a lefty. And then for Crim, it's just, we just didn't see much last year. And so that's where it's like, man, this is what we're rolling out, huh? But I get it, right? Like, ultimately the Rockies want to do what makes sense in developing some of these guys, but it also makes sense for those comments they've talked about of raising the floor. Signing someone like Paul Goldschmidt raises the floor, because I think at the first base position, the floor is really low. It's really low. And you could say that about a lot of positions right now for the Rockies and the team as a whole. But what better way is signing a veteran first baseman who, if anything, can at least push some of these other guys to try to really just get the most out of them. But that's what I would like to see, is getting a free agent first baseman. You could also just take a flyer on another maybe young guy, and maybe that's what the look of like Troy Johnston was, of signing him to a minor league contract. So that way, at least you'll see maybe some different guys of Freeman, Crim, Johnson, and Condon all maybe vying for that first base position. So that is a realistic path that the Rockies can take as well. The hope is, though, that you have multiple guys playing for a starting spot. Obviously, Tovar, Goodman, Doyle, those guys are all going to be locks for opening day starters. But for this infield, for the rest of the infield, you want competition, just so you can start to see, hey, we have some talent at some of these spots. But obviously, there's some glaring holes that won't be filled in 2026. But the hope is maybe try to get one more free agent at that first base position. We've mentioned even utility guys that can play first or second, or maybe even third, which would be nice. But ultimately, that's kind of what we're looking at the first base position. And we mentioned Tyler Freeman, and we look back at a trade that I think the Rockies look back on are really actually happy with getting Tyler Freeman in that Nolan Jones trade. Nolan Jones, who we mentioned earlier, had an awesome rookie campaign, but has really fallen off since. He hit 211 last year with a 304 slugging. That's the craziest part. Is Nolan Jones had, it felt like, unlimited power, and he hits a 304 slugging, a 600 OPS, and 355 at bats. He struck out 113 times. He just swinging and missing, swinging and missing. The guy strikes out a ton. And that was one of the concerns while he was with the Rockies. What were those strikeouts? And that hasn't changed in Cleveland. And for Freeman, in 377 at-bats, hits 281. His slugging's only 361, but more pop in the bat last year than Nolan Jones. And then his OPS is just way higher. OPS is way higher at 715. He did draw 5 fewer walks than Nolan Jones with 34, Jones with 39. But this is a trade. I think a lot of fans, including myself, when the trade was made, it was like, man, I know Jones had a down year in 2024, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. He feels like a real guy on this team. But you do have to credit the Rockies for making this move, because Freeman can show a little bit more versatility in just terms of where you can play him. And obviously it's just a one-season sample size. Maybe Nolan Jones goes out and hits 285 and his slugging's back over 500 and has 30 bombs. But it doesn't really feel like that's the trend for him right now. It feels like Jones's trend has all been going downhill since that rookie campaign. And for Freeman, I don't think there's a huge expectation that he's going to dominate at a major league level. But for what he produced last year, is pretty solid. And I think that's what the Rockies need right now, is something that's pretty solid. And so for the Colorado Rockies, obviously look back at this trade. They obviously just made a trade in the last week for McCarthy, who's just going to give them ultimate speed in the outfield if he can become an everyday guy. But you do have to credit the Rockies on this trade. It was a move that a lot of us questioned, and now you look back and you're like, no, that made a lot of sense, just in terms of how it's played out for the Rockies so far. And then I figured we'd end this show with another positive note, looking back at some of the best Rockies pitchers in franchise history. Kyle Freeland has actually been a guy, and this isn't me saying like, hey, Kyle Freeland, their one pitcher in Rockies history. But I did want to quickly note, Freeland has actually been one of the better pitchers in Rockies history. It doesn't feel that way just for how the last couple seasons have been, but he really has been pretty dominant for a Colorado Rockies pitcher. He obviously had that great season 2018 where he had a 2.85 ERA, and obviously had that epic wild card game against the Cubs. But ultimately, it's obviously Ubaldo Jimenez as that best pitcher, probably in Rockies history. He has obviously a dominant season, the only no-hitter in Rockies history. But there's also some other guys that I think a lot of his fans absolutely love. Jimenez is also the only pitcher in Rockies history to finish with an ERA under 4, which I think just speaks more on the difficulties at pitching at Coors Field than it does on the talent that the Rockies have had. Because the Rockies have had some really solid pitching talent. You obviously have my favorite, Jeff Francis, the only guy to start in a World Series, or I should say open up as the starter in the World Series for the Rockies. Jeff Francis was just absolutely my guy. You obviously have Aaron Cook, who was great. He finished with 72 wins as a Rocky. And speaking of wins, Jorge De La Rosa, most wins in Rockies history at 86 wins. I don't know who's going to touch De La Rosa's record for wins as a Rockies pitcher. Kyle Freeland is the closest, and he's about 20-plus wins behind. And so just based on where the Rockies are at, Freeland would have to stay with the Rockies for a couple more years to even have a chance at sniffing that. Pedro Stasio obviously was great for the Rockies. He pitched for the Rockies before the Humidor, though, so you look at some of his stats and you're like, this guy, But he really was a solid pitcher that just obviously had the unfortunate luck of pitching at the ultimate hitter's ballpark. And that's the hardest thing when you look at any pitcher in Rockies history, and maybe you're just drawn to ERA or whatever, but you have to remind yourself like there's a there's a huge thing, and that's that they have to pitch half their games at Coors Field. And so ERAs are all just going to be inflated. Some of these stats are all inflated, but they are obviously still quality pitchers. Jason Jennings, the guy who just hit bombs, right? The Rockies have had some really, really fun pitchers in the past, and pitchers who probably would have been better off if they had pitched somewhere else. You think of someone like German Marquez, like how good would Marquez have been if he got to pitch really in a ballpark that's way more pitcher friendly? He's probably talked about a lot different in the MLB landscape if that was the case, and that's really just the case for a lot of these guys. Is we're so grateful that they obviously pitch for the Rockies, but you're like, man, thanks for taking one on the chin and having some inflated numbers for us. But ultimately, it then goes into, well, who's going to be the next guy on the list? Who's going to be the next pitcher that can be part of some of these all-time names that you can reminisce on and just be thankful pitched for the Colorado Rockies? I think the most likely of what we have right now is Dollander. But again, he hasn't really proven much. There isn't like one guy on this staff that you look at and like, he's probably going to be with the rest. Dollander's the closest. We obviously already have Kyle Freeland. We already named Freeland. But obviously, it's hard to ignore. And I want to end with the guy that was the most dominant pitcher, and that was Ubaldo Jimenez, who obviously left the Rockies on some pretty bad terms. But I think we're far enough removed and far away to recognize how good he was. And he's probably one of the few pitchers in Rockies history who actually had more success with the Rockies than he did in other places. Usually guys leave Colorado and it's like, hey, this guy's actually pretty good. Ubaldo is the other way around. It's like, this guy has been nasty. He goes somewhere else and just ultimately begins to struggle. But you obviously are just grateful for someone like Jimenez. I don't know the next time we'll see a no-hitter. The Rockies have been close a couple of times for one of their pitchers getting a no-no, but ultimately, when you look at the Colorado Rockies and the history of pitchers that they've had, you have to look at Ubaldo Jimenez as the number one pitcher that the Rockies have ever had. And it'll be interesting to see if in like 30 years there's another guy that can take that crown. But felt like it was fun to go down memory lane. And if you're watching and you like leaving comments on YouTube videos, leave a comment. If you have a pitcher that you love that I didn't name, or if there's a pitcher I love that I did name and you want to talk about him, leave a comment down below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you tomorrow.